Hello, cooking enthusiasts. This week's video is going to be a little bit different. I thought I would do a sort of guided tour of one of my new little calculator tools. I've tried to include some pretty clear instructions within the actual tool, but I thought it would still be good to go over and talk about some of the thought process. Obviously, behind the scenes, this is literally just a spreadsheet, but I'm using this service called Grid, which I've used before to turn it into more presentable kind of interface. So the point of this is having fruit juice or maybe even fruit puree, and you want to sweeten it into a syrup or other product. And the most important thing is knowing the composition of the actual fruit you're working with. Unfortunately, this is something you have to sort of input manually. I'm sure if I actually knew coding, I could make this an actual drop-down menu with a big list of selections, but unfortunately, I am not. So the information you need is the glucose, fructose, and sucrose concentration of the fruit. Obviously, there is natural variability, there's different subcategories, and you have, traces of other sugars that aren't one of these three, but basically, those are the big three. So I provide a preliminary table resource. Um, this is a, you know, paleo keto style website, which I don't necessarily vouch for everything they talk about, but presumably they source decent data on sugar, and obviously this is just sort of a shortcut. You can very easily search on Google, insert fruit, sugar composition, and get articles or even scientific papers. So the important thing for this table, and actually any other data you look at for this type of calculation, is for now we are ignoring total sugar, and we really just want to pay attention to, again, those three specific sugars. And right now, the calculator is set to the numbers for cherry juice. But let's say we're going to do blueberry. So we go back to this table. We look at blueberry. Okay, so 3.5 glucose. We can do that. 3.5 glucose, 3.6 fructose, and just 0.2 sucrose. And again, we're really not concerned with the overall numbers at this stage. We just want these composition numbers, which gets us a ratio. And then what you ideally do is, um, actually measure the overall composition, which this calculator then extrapolates using this ratio. So now we have the composition numbers of blueberry inputted, again manually, unfortunately, but then you make a blueberry juice. I recently tried gelatin freeze-thaw concentration, or gelatin freeze-thaw clarification, which is sort of an interesting technique. It not only gets you a very sort of clarified, clear juice from what is normally essentially a very thick puree, but it also concentrates. So when I measured the Brix, it was roughly 18. So now we have 18% sugar behind the scenes being distributed into this ratio. Now, separately, I also looked up that blueberries can be between 1 and 2% acid, mostly citric acid. Now, again, even putting that acid information is sort of optional. Again, also additives are optional, and now everything else up to this point has been sort of a percentage, and additives is just grams. So you sort of have to make all the calculations and then sort of circle back to additives, because that could be flavorings, spices, thickeners, preservatives, and you want to more determine how much you're adding once you have your totals. And now we are setting this to make a 50% sugar syrup, which is pretty standard. But again, this is very flexible. You could go up quite a bit. Let's say 55. But you can also go down, and then this becomes less of a syrup calculator and more of a juice sweetening calculator. And then that's really it. You have your recipe. So it's taking the amount of juice you have, the sugar level it is that you measured with the original Brix, and it's telling you how much sugar to add to achieve your final sugar concentration. And it's also suggesting a little bit of salt and acid levels based on, again, information you provide. Another sort of special feature is, in addition to giving you the number of grams of sugar to add to achieve the sort of target concentration, it also gives you a secondary ingredient list, which is the same quantity of sugar, but roughly matching the original composition of the fruit. And this is sort of a theoretical concept I'm working on called sugar matching, where in theory, by matching the composition of sugar, you also get a better sense of the taste of the fruit, because sweetness is not only magnitude, like fructose is generally perceived sweeter than sucrose, but it also spikes early and fades quickly. So essentially, not only are you matching the sort of flavor in terms of sweet intensity, but you're matching sort of the two-dimensional profile of sweetness over time. Because obviously, if a fruit was mostly sucrose, it would be very sweet, but it would also be sweet quickly and fade quickly. But whether that actually makes a better or more fruity product is something that still needs to be tested. Again, these are the basic stats of the syrup. So if you're measuring by grams, you can say, okay, 0.58. A simple syrup obviously is going to have a sweetness of 0.5, which you can see reflected in this sort of comparison table. So it's sweeter than regular simple syrup, definitely by volume, because 1 ml contains roughly 1.25 grams of syrup, as you can see by the estimated SG in the top left, which is essentially the density. And obviously, there's two sets of numbers for if you've only added regular table sugar or sucrose, or if you went for the sugar matching style recipe. Again, these are definitely estimates. This is not an exact science, as it were. Obviously, the perception of sweetness of even specific types of sugar varies from person to person and also based on things like temperature. But the final tool is sort of attempting to give you guidelines of if you're trying to achieve the same sweetness, either by volume for like cocktails or by mass, you can see how things compare to pretty standard syrups. So obviously, this hypothetical blueberry syrup, even if we only add sucrose, it still contains some natural sugars like fructose, so it's sweeter than a simple syrup. And so if a recipe called for 100 grams of simple syrup, we would only need, 85.5, and even a smaller ratio if we were measuring by volume. Whereas obviously this syrup is not as sweet as maple syrup or rich simple syrup, so we would actually need slightly more of this hypothetical blueberry syrup if we were swapping it into a recipe. And that is pretty much it for this video. Hopefully it made sense and was interesting. Obviously, this calculator is just embedded in my website. There is a link in the video description. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions or feedback about the calculator, please let me know. Otherwise, thank you for watching.